So open that page, I'll search for my fix, find what I need in the deep dark abyss.
Jakers!
Kath, hi.
Hi, how's it going?
It's good. How are you doing?
Whew, it's like I'm glad that the vacation's over because now I can like do my work in peace. You know what I mean? Woof.
I know. Do we have a post-vacation lined up
I know.
for us?
Seriously, I guess it's like it serves us right for looking forward to vacation so much. Anyway, we got some great stuff to talk about today. I want you to start with your juicy tidbit.
Okay, here I go. Well, I was thrilled over the non-vacation vacation when I saw a New York Times the morning newsletter that I was like, wow, they've picked up our podcast. That was my initial thought, because the headline was like something around AI haters. I mean, that's not the title of our podcast. We're AI skeptics, but that was the flavor, right? They were saying in this morning newsletter how Americans are highly skeptical of AI. And I was like, oh, wow. Well, great news for our podcast. We probably have many, many listeners. But let me just summarize what they said in their in this essay. And then where I'm going with it is I'm kind of like, are they living on a different planet from me, or at least from the writers at the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere? So I'm going to say what they said and then kind of contrast it with some other vibes I've been feeling in the AI space. What they said was Americans are very skeptical of AI because it's killing jobs. It's a black box that spits out bias and hallucinations and sometimes slop. It's controlling high-stakes decisions in our lives. It's stealing from artists and writers. It's sucking up all the energy and resources and money in the economy. And it's all controlled by just a few Silicon Valley billionaires. And that was a summary of like what they say people are struggling with AI. And further, they said all that skepticism is kind of informed by the recent history of social media. And all of that like really jived for me. I was like, oh yeah, this is a lot of overlap with how I think about it. But then I wondered, maybe they're just living in a progressive bubble, which would not be the first time. And they're missing some reality. So I flipped over to the Wall Street Journal daily AI newsletter. And in just today's one, they were reporting on how big companies remain all in on AI. It appears that sentiment remains strong going into 2026, especially in healthcare. Health systems are increasingly adopting AI, with 27% paying for commercial licenses. That's triple the rate across the whole economy, they reported. So over here in big business world, Wall Street Journal is like, no, everyone's all in on AI. And then the last information I want to throw into this is from the Pew Research Center, who does all kinds of public opinion polling, right? And they were reporting on how much U.S. teens are using AI and other social media, but focused on AI chatbots. It's like 2/3 of teens use chatbots, and the rates are even higher among Black and Hispanic teens than white teens. And if you look not just at AI, but also at sort of social media as maybe a glimpse into the future of where this might go, then the trends are even more stark. Black and Hispanic and lower income teens are twice as likely to be almost constantly online versus white and higher income teens. So it made me think of this world where maybe some of the intelligentsia are worried and skeptical. And that's who the New York Times is talking about when they're saying, people are very skeptical about AI. But meanwhile, the sort of ever-growing ranks of the rest of us are gobbling up the AI slop, which is engineered to be addictive and crappy and pervasive and everywhere you turn. So that's my hot take for the day. Maybe there's some skepticism and we're part of it, but there's a bigger ocean of the rest of us who are not really talked about in that article.
Yeah, well, okay. Now, I think that we can all understand why big business is into AI, all in. First of all, it's just good business. if there's plenty of evidence that people who haven't even been doing AI have been adding the phrase AI to their business plan and getting more money. So it's like, it just makes sense to say you're all in and to be all in some kind of nominal way, just for the sake of the business. And then it also makes sense for people to be skeptical, like, for example, the workers that are being replaced by AI, to be skeptical. I think what I disagree with in your take is the idea that you can't be both a super user of AI and skeptical. I think, in fact, that's exactly what's happening. I think both can be true, right? So let's start with the kids. The kids are smart. They're super skeptical. They see the jobs that they someday might have being replaced by AI. They see the harms of social media befall their friends and themselves, and they take note of it. They're not dummies, right? But AI is still useful to them. It still helps. In fact, they probably feel like they're in a arms race with their classmates to use AI at least as well, to cheat on their homework at least as well, or whatever it is, write college essays. So in other words, there's incentives and in fact, almost requirements, depending on how you think about it, to use AI, even if you hate it, even if you realize it's destructive. In fact, I would argue that even some of the people that are falling victim to the worst situations with AI, like psychosis and suicide, they probably also hate AI. They're probably also skeptical of AI at some level, even if they're in love with it. So I just want to point out that, like, even among the kids, there's no contradiction there, actually. But especially, like, when you think about adult users, I mean, I've spoken to programmers who, they are being required to use AI to do their job. And that's not why they got into programming. They got into programming because they like problem solving. And some of them are leaving because they see the writing on the wall that the job is never going to get better. So I mean, the point is that they're both super users and skeptics, and it's not a contradiction. And the final thing I'll say is that, like, all the skeptical things that you mentioned, this is bad for society. In fact, there are all kinds of versions of that. This is bad for society.
Yep.
They're all systemic problems that are kind of irrefutable and obvious about AI. But then the reasons people use it are not systemic reasons. They're individual reasons, right? And so that's really I think the underlying, like, metaphorical reason why, or metaphysical reason, really, that, like, you can have both be true. Like, systemically, this sucks, but to get this shit done that I have to get done, I need to use it.
Kind of a judge the commons thing. Like, it's bad for all of us, but I need to do it now because my job requires it, or because I have so much stuff on my plate. Yeah, I like that. Look,
or because, to be honest and frank, because it's useful. That's the thing. Like, we didn't need AI until it was introduced. And now it's fair to say that many people need it, like, are hooked on it, or, like, cannot walk away from it anyway, because they are getting stuff from it that other people are getting from it too, and they feel like they're in a competition with all those other people. I'm not saying we actually need it. I feel like if everyone didn't have it, then we wouldn't need it anymore. But the fact is that, like, if everybody else has it and I'm not using it, then you can fall behind in various ways. So for an individual incentives, like, perspective, you got to use it, even if you fucking hate it. And so I think that's really what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way you're describing it sounds to me like a recipe for cynicism. I fucking hate it, but I have to use it, and I am still using it. I mean, that might just be that's what A plus B equals, is cynicism. I guess I'm going to have to think about that a little more. I'm wondering what it means to have ambivalent feeling, but still strong adoption. I mean, there's got to be some consequence of that. There's some other element of that equation that's not, like, addressed yet. So for next time.
I mean, I agree with you. It's either cynicism or a form of resentment. I definitely feel like, there's plenty of resentment, actually. and like it's the corporations that are celebrating and the rich assholes in Silicon Valley that are like tap dancing across the floor in ecstasy that we resent. They're sort of like offering themselves as totems of resentment. It's dangerous, but that's what's happening. And I'm going to bring up the second topic because it's actually quite related, which is that, there's been this surge, I'll call it. And we know this because of our work in Ocean. Like we're working alongside many, many others in thinking about like how to push the responsibility and the accountability of harm onto, the companies that build these platforms like the AI chatbots. And so we're seeing a lot of a proliferation really of like harmful cases where people committing suicide or going into psychosis or less criminal things, like things that just like they're losing their spouse or they're losing they're losing touch with their children or they're losing touch with their parents or whatever it is, like people like tragedies, but that are not necessarily criminal tragedies, but still harmful. And you're seeing that all over the place with chatbots, and it doesn't have to be official chatbots, by the way. It kind of drives me nuts that people are like, oh, but ChatGPT isn't a chatbot. Like it is a chatbot, even if it's framed as a large language model. I don't know if that's the one that people claim isn't a chatbot, but like, let's face it, they're all chatbots. Like if you can chat with them, they're chatbots. They don't have to be like character AI chatbots, which are like literally sold as chatbots to be like, to have those kinds of negative effects.
Right.
And, it's a really fascinating world in a kind of gory, macabre way. Like if you look into like the kinds of psychosis that Claude, gets people into versus ChatGPT versus other things, like they're different, but they're harmful no matter what to the people that experience them. So what I found this week was an article from the Washington Post about sort of a recovery group that's sort of being formed online. Many of whose members are either themselves recovering from psychosis, AI psychosis, chatbot stuff, or their like family was harmed by it. I don't know if you took a look at that article I sent you.
I did.
Yeah. Did you have any thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, it's so, I thought it was interesting. They talked in the article about a Reddit community, real people reaching out to one another and, talking through these episodes and sort of getting back in touch with reality. And my mind was going back over and over to this idea of the friction of talking to real people. One thing I think mentioned in the article was like, it takes real people some time to respond. And people who had just been through these chatbot fueled psychoses or, other issues, they got used to the chatbot is responding as soon as you enter your text, right? It's like you see those ... like we've been trained through text messages to, you're waiting for that ... to resolve into a response. And just like the pace of back and forth of conversation, in this recovery community, people were getting used to the pace of human to human conversation again. And that resonated with me, with the side of me that like has deep fears about natural language conversation and how it really sneaks through our defenses, something like that, like the pace of back and forth and how quickly and, I'm going to guess like imperceptibly, we just get retuned to be like, oh, I need a response now. And when I have to wait on you, Kathy, to think about a response to me, I start to get annoyed or I feel uncomfortable. Like that little shifting of the context of conversation. It was amazing that that's coming out in this article in this community. Yeah. And I wonder about the many other subtle shifts to the framing of what a conversation is that we're going to have to undo. Let me just say one more thing. Kathy, you told me after you went to the Massachusetts State House, like you heard this analogy about asbestos. asbestos as was a miracle fiber. It was used in all kinds of buildings. Later, they discovered, it's actually harmful to your health. Now we have to go back into those buildings, tear out the walls, and pull out very, very carefully all the asbestos. And I was thinking, that analogy is really useful to me now. Like I'm thinking about the asbestos in our way of talking, in our way of thinking, like the AI asbestos that's changing the frame of those spaces.
Well, interesting. I was thinking of a different metaphor, which I'm going to bring up, but it's like related to the fact that like people who are detoxing from AI chatbot psychosis or just addiction. I mean, let's just start with addiction because that's even like more widespread, right? People who are addicted to their chatbots. They have to, in weaning themselves, right? They have to get used to pauses of as much of a day or a day and a half if they're chatting with their friends on text or something. Sometimes people text back, but sometimes they're busy and they don't text back. And how do you deal with that? I would think it's like kind of like going from smoking, chain smoking to like trying to smoke 3 or 4 cigs a day. And like, that's hard, right? That's really hard. Even though you're you're still smoking. And here comes the metaphor. That wasn't the metaphor, by the way, that you could think of that as a metaphor too. Okay, here's a second metaphor. The metaphor I heard at a conference, which it has been stuck with me, and I forget who in the audience said it, but it was really stunning, is that like when I'm hungry, 2 things are happening. This is what she said. And I think you were there with me when this happened. But when I'm hungry, 2 things are happening. First of all, it hurts. Like hunger is a type of pain. And second of all, my body needs food. If you give me a hunger suppressant, then you've stopped the pain, but my body still needs food. You haven't actually fed me. So what does that mean? If like in the analogy she was striking there is like AI and AI chatbots and the notion of connection, right? So like, I want to feel connection. And one way that my body thinks connection is happening is when I get response. Like I write a question, it responds. I write something, it responds. That is a feeling of connection, like a hunger suppressant. You no longer feel lonely. You were lonely, but now you're not lonely because you're getting response. But is that a hunger suppressant or is that actually food? That's the question. Like, whereas when you have to wait for your friend to respond from text for a day and a half, they do respond and they actually have thought about you and they're saying, hey, checking in with you. They're actually, it's a real person actually connecting with you versus you don't have to wait any amount of time, but it's a chatbot and they're just responding automatically. I mean, that's what I keep coming back to. Is it like we have a natural need as humans for connection. And the feeling that we're not getting connection is a feeling of loneliness. And these chatbots have somehow hijacked our notion of connection. And a big part of it, I would say, is that immediate response. And so I really feel for these folks who are trying to withdraw. And they're trying to withdraw from that artificial synthetic connection. And this is going to be a big part of that withdrawal is just like, how do I wean myself of that, like that pleasure center pop every time they write back, and like I have to wait for real people to write back to me. And it's a better connection, but it doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, and I love that analogy. And it makes me wonder, as a measurement nerd, like, how do we tease apart those 2 parts? There's a short-term, feeling that your loneliness has been assuaged or something, right? I got the quick response. I'm like, there's that short-term, very zoomed in view, and it looks like the chatbot is doing pretty well. But then when you zoom out and see the bigger picture, like, no, these people are lonelier than ever. So as a measurement nerd, and then also as an AI, someone who gets to work on AI stuff, you wonder, like, how can we have it both ways? How can we incorporate some of those longer term measures of suffering, well-being? I don't know. How can we track that? I guess one way is seeing these terrible outcomes, but what else do we have?
You're making me think that we should devote a future podcast to this question, because but first of all, because it's a great question. Second of all, because I've heard contradictory things depending on the time scale.
Yeah.
Right? Because I've heard like people who are suggested go chat with a chatbot once a day for a week are like, I feel less lonely. But if you ask for a longer period of time, they feel more lonely than they started. So, and I haven't read these papers myself. So let's maybe for a future podcast track down these studies and maybe even track down an author of these studies to talk about this. Because I think this is a really important question in our longer term question of like, how do we assess harm for AI? And what time scale is a part of that question, right? What time scale? And it can't just be like, we only care about 1 week in, right? This is because unless chatbots are going to disappear in a week, our time scale is years.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love it. And it's perfect timing as we're time to turn to our third topic. So we got to, setting up a future episode on this.
Yeah. So one thing that happened, thanks to our wonderful producer, Aaron, we got on all the different podcast platforms over the last couple of weeks. Woo! And I started blogging about it on my blog, MathBabe. And I'm mentioning this, mathbabe.org, because people have already started commenting and asking us questions. And I love that. Do you love that, Jake?
It's so great. Audience engagement. It's happening.
Yeah. And we do want that. In fact, we would like full on questions, like, what do you think about blah, blah, blah. But right now, all I've got so far, which we're going to pick up and run with, is say more about X. And the two X's that we've gotten, I guess are an X and a Y, are reproducibility and explainability. And we're going to tackle in the last 9 or 10 minutes, the notion of reproducibility in the context of AI. Now, I'm going to back up a little bit and just say reproducibility in the context of all kind of algorithms is something that actually matters a lot. The kind of work Jake and I do normally where we audit algorithms, we're auditing algorithms that are typically pretty well fixed, right? If you think about it, like they change from year to year. If we're talking about a life insurance premium algorithm or hiring algorithm, but they don't change from minute to minute. You'd expect somebody who applied for a job on Tuesday and got rejected, they'd get rejected on Thursday too, probably. Like the algorithm doesn't just randomly morph. It is pretty consistent, those old school algorithms. AI has introduced a more of a statistical noise. There's of course, AI doesn't directly answer the question of whether someone should get hired, but you can use AI, like large language models. You can ask large language models, and people have asked large language models to sort of rank candidates for a job relative to a particular job description. If they have their resumes, like rank these people in terms of like how good they'd be at this job. And it is pretty random. Like there's randomness there. And you could imagine in that context, that somebody gets rejected on Tuesday, but accepted on Thursday. So there's more randomness now. I mean, that's the first thing I'll say about it. What about you, Jake?
This topic is super dear to my heart as an evaluation nerd. So, it's the first things I think of when I hear reproducibility is like you did an experiment to test a program or a product, and and you think that the same experiment with the same setup should come out the same way every time. Somewhere there, that's a definition of insanity, right? That people like bat around, where they're like, if you have the same setup and you expect a different result, that's what insanity would mean. You remember that you hear this quote somewhere?
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
So it comes from the world of lab science, and it comes from the world of well-controlled conditions. And then I encountered it because I was doing evaluation research with field economists. So they were doing like social science experiments, but they wanted to have the same reality. They're like trying to test microfinance loans. And they're like, if we set up a well-designed experiment and we offer these different loans to the different people and we do it, and then we carefully measure the outcomes, like we can trust that measurement in the sense that if we set up the same experiment again, we would expect to get the same result. That's like a key scientific method kind of, assumption. And then that, it turns out, has not stood up over the last couple of decades. There was a whole thing called the replication crisis in the, let's say, 2010s in social science, where some of these lab and then field experiments didn't quite replicate, and people started to freak out because there are good reasons why not. Like maybe you get some statistically spurious results. They look statistically significant, but it's just because you measured many, many things. The analogy people will make is like, if you flip one coin and you got 15 heads in a row, that would be fishy. But if you flip 10,000 coins and one of them got 10 heads in a row or 15 heads in a row, that would not be fishy. You just flipped a lot of coins.
Okay, Jake, I got to pause you there because I actually wrote about this in my Shame Machine book.
Oh, good.
It was like, but from my perspective, like the top line is, this is bad statistics, and I think it's intentional and it's cheating. Okay, so what I did was I broke down the Prevagen studies. So Prevagen is this fake medicine that is sold to older people. It's called a brain medicine or something, and it's supposed to make you sharper, but it's not approved by the FDA. It's a scam. And the way that they did one study that made it look good is that they actually did 20 studies, just like you just said. And one of them had, p-value 0.05 or whatever it was. It was just like the thing that was like as likely as a 1 in 20.
Right.
It was almost perfect as a way of debunking bad science. But the reason I mention it is because this is bad science. Like, so what you just described is not reproducible result as a result of bad science. And of course, there are lots of famous like faked data studies, like where people just like copy and paste data. It's just fake. So can you give an example of a result that's not reproducible, but isn't like malintent?
Yes, I think I can. I mean, I don't have a paper site at hand, but like what you just described, doing 20 studies happens at many levels. Sometimes one author does 20 studies and they find the one that gets a good result and they send that one in. But a different way of thinking about it is
that's bad science.
That's bad science. But a different way of thinking about it is 1,000 independent authors around the world each do one study, and the one journal receives, all the ones that were successful. Like some studies, even if every author just does one study independently and they're all doing good science, still one in 100 is going to have spuriously significant results. Right. And that's the one that's likely to get published. So there's no bad intent there. I mean, maybe you could argue the journal editor looking at all the submissions should take into account the publication bias. But I mean,
no, you're making a very good point, because people won't submit an article that doesn't have a statistically significant result. So it's like the journal, the notion of even just the notion of journals itself makes this happen.
Right. And I'm getting, there's like good news and then there's bad news on top. So the good news is social science did some stuff to help address this problem. Pre-registering experiments, naming the research questions that you're going to ask before you ask them, so you don't come up with more and more questions until you get a yes answer. There are some things that generally involve tying your hands before you run the experiment to reduce some of that phishing. So that's good. By
the way, sorry to interrupt so much, but I think the Prevagen study did that, and then they didn't get anything that they wanted. So then they did 19 more studies.
19 more.
You know what I mean? That's what happened.
It's a gamesmanship, but then here comes AI, and this is where I would end with a little bit of bad news. I was, as an evaluation nerd, super excited about all the pre-registration stuff and hoping that we could get our hands around it that way. Then I tried to do an evaluation using a large language model, and it was an evaluation where you have to ask ChatGPT, okay, rank something or score something or tell me yes or no to this question. And just to be safe, I was let's just do each one 5 times. Same exact question, same exact prompt. You don't always get the same answer. And then, I'm just I don't know what kind of hand tying can get over that. Nothing. I mean, it's doing the exact same thing and getting a different answer. Going back to that crude definition of insanity, it's am I insane? I just put the same information, the same prompt, and I get a different score.
Okay, but I just want to say for the record that does feel like local insanity, local chaos, if you will, local statistical noise. But I would still have a pretty strong suggestion for, a large company using a hiring algorithm that is based on large language models, right? And it's the same suggestion that we already make when we are advising large companies that use AI algorithm hiring, which is to have a monitor. Like you monitor it. And so like the thing is about statistical noise is that if you have a large enough amount of data, the statistical noise goes away, right? So in other words, if you have to monitor it for the type of harm that we think of as problematic and systematic, like if it's being a sexist hiring algorithm, you wouldn't want to just conclude that it's sexist after seeing 15 women get rejected and 15 men get accepted, right? You want to be like long term over thousands and thousands of applicants, like what is happening here. And if you if you have a long term monitor, a long term view with lots of data, then you still get to see what's happening. Like you can clean up the statistical noise. That's my argument.
Yeah, I think do it a bunch of times and take the average kind of is, if that's another way of saying what you're saying, is the first thing you'd want to try. But I think there is a real irreducible difference. Like when the underlying machine you're using to evaluate something, it's a microscope. I put a slide under it. I see what's on the slide. There's like that kind of fidelity. And large language models don't offer the same kind of fidelity. It's a little bit of a noisy fidelity. So maybe the answer is just, as you said, like just try to average out the noise and find the signal. But it's a pretty different paradigm. So I think it's worth talking about.
It is. It's worth talking about. And thank you for whoever asked us for this, which I probably should have written down. But also, everybody should absolutely feel free to go to mathbabe.org and find one of these blog posts I've been blogging about for this podcast, AI Skeptics, and ask us a question that we will read out loud, and we'll say your name next time and answer. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.